Hello, in this video, we're going to talk about the factors that affect microbial growth. So in a different video, we went over how microbes grow, and now we're going to talk about some of their growth preferences. And so why do I have a picture of pizza here? Well, just like how different people have different preferences on their toppings for pizza and, just the different things that you're going to do with your pizza. Bacteria also have different preferences in terms of temperature, pH, and all of that. And so that is what we're going to be talking about. And again, I like to emphasize that the word here is preference. So, for example, if somebody gave me a pizza that had mushrooms or pepperoni, and I don't really like either of those things, it doesn't necessarily mean I can't eat it, right? It just means that they're not my preference. And so, same thing for bacteria. We're going to talk about different preferences. Doesn't necessarily mean they can't grow in certain conditions. It's just that they prefer certain conditions over others. Um, so let's start with oxygen preference. So different bacteria have different preferences in terms of the amount of oxygen that they are, living in. And so an aerobic or obligate aerobic bacteria, they can only grow in oxygen. So they have to grow in the presence of oxygen. They are incapable of growing without oxygen. We, for example, are aerobic. If we don't have oxygen, we will die. And so some bacteria, they definitely need oxygen to grow. Then there are the bacteria who are obligate anaerobes, the opposite. They cannot grow in the presence of oxygen. They can only grow when there is no oxygen. And so, why are there bacteria that need oxygen versus don't need oxygen? Well, the bacteria that need oxygen, they need it for primarily their electron transport chain, whereas the obligate anaerobes, usually it's because oxygen is a very toxic molecule and it produces a lot of toxic byproducts, and obligate anaerobes don't have enzymes to get rid of these toxins. So that's the primary reason why we have these differences. Then we have the facultative anaerobes. Facultative anaerobes can live in both environments. They can live with oxygen, without oxygen, they're perfectly fine. But they do have a preference and they do like to grow more when there is oxygen. So in a test tube, so these, by the way, are test tubes where there's lots of oxygen at the top and no oxygen at the bottom. So in a facultative anaerobe, they can grow at the top where there's tons of oxygen. And they can still grow at the bottom where there's no oxygen, but they definitely grow better when oxygen is present. So we call these facultative anaerobes. And I know the name sounds kind of deceiving because the name says anaerobe, even though their preference is to be aerobic. So I personally don't really like the name. Why is it called that? But that's what it is. So facultative anaerobes prefer oxygen, but can still grow without oxygen. Then we have the aerotolerant. Some people call them aerotolerant anaerobes, but honestly just call them aerotolerants. These are going to be organisms that don't have any preference. They can grow with or without oxygen, and they grow evenly throughout the test tube. It doesn't really matter. So these are the people who will eat pizza no matter what, right? You can put any topping on a pizza, pepperoni, pineapple, mushrooms, bell peppers. They'll eat any type of pizza. And so they don't really have a preference. And then finally, we have the microaerophiles. They grow, they're a little picky here. They grow in just a small amount of oxygen. So, not too much oxygen and definitely not zero oxygen. They like to have a little bit of oxygen. And so they're called the microaerophiles, micro meaning a small amount of oxygen. So, those are the oxygen preferences of different bacteria. Bacteria also have temperature preferences. So with temperature, we have 4 different types. We've got our psychrophiles, which prefer cold. Notice though that they have a range, so they can go anywhere from super cold to sort of cold, but they do have kind of a peak or optimal temperature. And so psychrophiles usually do their best at about 10 degrees Celsius, maybe a little bit colder. So these are microbes that would grow, for example, in the refrigerator. Mesophiles are going to grow in room temperature to body temperature ranges. So room temperature is somewhere in like the 25. Body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. So mesophiles like that kind of range. Then we have the thermophiles. They like it hot, 60, 70 degrees Celsius. and then the hyperthermophiles, which like it basically boiling. So then we have the pH preferences. So this one's pretty straightforward. Acidophiles like it acidic, neutrophiles like it neutral, and alkalophiles like it in the basic. And again, notice that there is a range. So these bacteria can grow, as little as 2 pH or 1 pH and as high as 5, but their preference is 3. So again, it's not perfect black and white. There's some gray area. And as you notice, there's also some overlap between some of the categories as well. Finally, there's the salinity and pressure preferences. So salinity means how salty an environment is. And so halotolerants are organisms that like to grow in high salt concentrations, but they don't have to. So they can grow in high salt. They can grow without high salt. They can just do whatever they want. Whereas halophiles, these are organisms that have to grow in high salt. They can only grow in the presence of high salt, usually anywhere from 10 to 20% salt, which is extremely high. So that's the difference between a tolerant and a phile. A tolerant can tolerate it. A phile needs to have it. And this is the same case for the pressure. So barotolerants are bacteria that can grow at high pressure. So, for example, if you're living at the bottom of the ocean, then you're a barotolerant. And then there are some microbes that are barophiles. They can only grow when there's high pressure. So again, same thing. Tolerants can grow at high pressure. Philes need the high pressure to survive. So that's pretty much it for that video. Hopefully this was interesting, and I will see you in the next video.